You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today we are diving into the NFC North Defenses, ranking them number 4 to number 1, just the defensive side of the football in the NFC North. Cannot stress that enough. That being said, I want to hear from you all. Make sure you're commenting down below. Who do you like? Who do you dislike? Who's at the top of this division? Who's at the bottom of the division? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What would your rankings be? All of that, whatever it may be, fire away in that comment section down below. I would love to discuss with you all. Now, that being said, when I look at the NFC North, this is one of those divisions that is just littered with fairly impressive defensive play, and that might be putting it lightly. You have 3 teams that finished inside the top 10. You had the Chicago Bears finishing 13 overall when it comes to just points per game allowed. All of these defenses were very impressive units last year in some fashion or another. So when you look at like number 4 within the NFC North, I feel like it's not as bad as being number 4 as, say, a lesser, more cupcake-like division, the NFC South. Sorry to be catching strays today to those of you who are fans, but I feel like this is a tough division to be in, especially when you're ranking defensively. And at the number 4 spot, Bears fans, we already did this once, and I'm going to have to unfortunately do it again, but I'm sorry. I have you at the bottom of the board, basically for the same reason as the offense. I need to see more to be able to believe it. A lot of turnover has happened with the Chicago Bears team, this offense, especially on the offensive side of the football, but the defense is seeing a bit of some restructuring as well. I will start off by saying that Ben Johnson's decision to go out and bring in Dennis Allen as the defensive coordinator of this football team is one of my favorite hires of the offseason, point blank period, amongst all coaches. That even includes Ben Johnson into that mix there. Love what he's going to bring to Chicago's team as a whole, and of course the offense, but I love him bringing in Dennis Allen. You look at the struggles that the Chicago Bears had this past season when it came to stopping the run, and granted, it's fair to point at some of the issues that this team had altogether just through the borderline dysfunction that Chicago dealt with last year, but they were a bottom of the league run defense, and it never really ever got better. I feel like a good day as far as run defense was concerned for Chicago was not allowing more than like 120 yards in a game. That's how it felt last season. In comes Dennis Allen, who prior to taking over for New Orleans as the head coach, when he was just the defensive coordinator over there, New Orleans consistently had themselves top 5 run defenses for years. From 2018 to 2021, they were a top 5 run defense year over year over year. And I think the way this defense is built right now, maybe it might take a little bit to reach that exact level, but they are definitely a unit that could be far closer to middle of the pack than bottom of the pack at the very least in my eyes. And there was clearly some working on the defensive front to help and work towards that direction. You look at like the drafting of a Shamar Turner in the 2nd round, signing a guy like Grady Jarrett, veteran presence, and then going and getting a guy like Dio Dengbo, who, for what it's worth, when you look at the signing of him there, he's more of like you're betting on potential upside than anything else, but there was some clear reworking along the defensive front. You already have some really good name value guys there as well. Your linebacking room is a really impressive unit with Tremaine Edmonds and of course TJ Edwards there. So like your defensive front as a whole is a pretty effective unit. It just needs to, hopefully with good coaching, step up to the level that they are capable of playing at. That all being said, if they can turn things around there, they were a really good pass defense last season, and there's nothing really about the unit that tells me that's not going to be the case this season. I look at Chicago's secondary, and it's honestly one of my favorite in the NFL because there's a really good group of young guys in there that are playing extremely well, coupled with some nice veteran leadership. Of course, led by Jalen Johnson. They're all pro cornerback, and you have guys like Kyler Gordon, Tyreek Stevenson, who have played excellent in complementary football alongside him, and then Kevin Byard being brought in as like the veteran presence for this defense last year. He ended up doing really well for them. And then, of course, Jaquan Brisker, who is personally like one of my favorite safeties in the NFL when he's healthy and on the football field. I love his style of play. This defense should be a good unit. And again, yes, I have them at number 4, but being number 4 in the NFC North is not the same as being number 4 in some of the other weaker divisions in the NFL. The NFC North is a really tough division, and we have been through the motions of the excitement and what the Bears could be this next season, and we're coming off another one of those really high highs from last offseason spilling into this year or this past season. So I'm just erring more on the side of caution and just wanting to see it to believe it. I think this could be a really good unit. And like to go back to like the Dio Dengbo point that I was talking about earlier, I didn't really get to flesh that out, but like I like the signing of him. He didn't have a really strong season in Indianapolis last year, but the year prior in a rotational role, he had about 8 sacks. So I mean, you're playing alongside a guy like Montez Sweat who really needs some help as far as pass rush is concerned coming off the edge. I think you bring him in, these two playing alongside each other, I can see the potential and I can see why they were willing to give him the opportunity. His first full-fledged opportunity as a starter wasn't necessarily great in his last season in Indianapolis, but he has shown he can be productive in some capacity with those 8 sacks the year prior. So like from the pass rush to what this run defense could potentially be with good coaching to a secondary that I think is very, very good and a group of linebackers who can play the run, but they can also drop back into coverage and be effective there as well. This should be a good unit, all things considered. I just don't necessarily know where with the way everything has changed this offseason. So I'm taking the safe spot and just putting them at number 4. Moving into number 3, and when you look at the Lions, the Vikings, and the Packers, again, all 3 of these defenses finishing inside the top 10 as far as points per game are concerned. They were all really good units, but they all had their flaws in one capacity or another. And I decided to settle on the Lions at the number 3 spot here. And a big piece of that has to do, of course, with the departure of defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, who took the head coaching job in New York. And now you have yourself Kelvin Shepard, who is taking over, which is a crazy thing for me because I remember Kelvin Shepard coming into the NFL and now he's literally defensive coordinator of a football team. So like, I mean, I'm not old, but I feel like I'm getting old just being able to say something like that out loud. That being said, I'm really looking forward to seeing what this defense looks like post Aaron Glenn, because what he was able to do with a roster that was littered with injuries, especially on the defensive side of the football last season for basically the entirety of the year, it felt like you had like 3rd or 4th string guys out there on defense and making plays in big spots, especially towards the tail end of the season to get them to the point that they made it at the end of the postseason for them. There's a lot to be curious about, I guess you could say here. A lot of guys coming back and getting healthy will, of course, be huge for this defense. Of course, you look at the loss that you had of Aiden Hutchinson in week 5. He was on an absolute tear before going down. Of course, 7.5 sacks in what was essentially like 4.5 games before he went down with his season-ending injury. I think he'll be a big plus for a defense that had a ton of pressure last year. Just they missed their finisher and their guy in Aiden Hutchinson. I think him coming back will be great for them. You, of course, look at the additions that they made for the secondary, and that's where my reservation starts to pop up for the Lions. And again, you can point to injuries last season, but the Detroit Lions have not been great when it comes to stopping the pass. They finished last season 30th in yards per game allowed through the air. DJ Reed and Avonte Maddox coming into the fold here, hopefully looking to alleviate some of that problem there. But overall, I do think that this defense should still be pretty good. Top 5 run defense last season. I don't really see that changing either as well. I do think when you look at guys that they brought in, you had DJ Reader last year who is serviceable, but at this stage in his career has a lot of mileage and a lot of injuries on him. So you go and you get a Tyleik Williams in round number 1. I would not be shocked if he winds up getting decent amount of play time this season. It's just DJ Reader struggling to stay healthy year over year for a consistent full season has been a problem for a while. Great presence, great locker room leader, and great football player when he's on the field, but the emphasis on when he is on the field is definitely something to point out. Then you have a guy like a Malcolm Rodriguez coming back who basically clawed tooth and nail for a starting role in the defense and got it, and then ultimately went down after his 3rd straight start. So this is a unit that a lot of injuries potentially screwed up what could have been a really good defense last year, and I expect them to be good again this year, but in a division where you're also battling with Green Bay and with Minnesota, who both have very good defenses in their own right. I just decided to settle on them at number 3 for right now, just because of uncertainty with the coaching changes and what this defense could look like this year. Moving into the top half of the NFC North, though, I did a lot of juggling between Minnesota and Green Bay. I feel like there is a very good case for either one of these teams being at the number 1 spot and the other one being settled into the number 2 spot. So if you agree or disagree with this one here, I mean, I hear me out. I hear where you're coming from, so I understand why you may disagree. Do not get me wrong. I sat down to record this, and I initially had Minnesota at number 1, and I sat there, I thought about it some more, and I was like, but I ultimately settled that Minnesota with number 2. That being said, my whys. I love the aggression that this defense brings to the table, and I love what Brian Flores has done with this defense in Minnesota. I completely wrote them off last year. The defensive play in Minnesota prior to Brian Flores really pulling things together just never really impressed me, and I was in the same situation I kind of am with Chicago right now in the whole I need to see it to believe it type of thing. Brian Flores has made me a believer. It's a very high-risk, high-reward, ultra-aggressive defense, tons of turnovers forced, tons of pressure, tons of sacks, but with all that aggressive nature does come that high risk, and you saw it in the amount of yards that the defense allowed through the air last season. So believe me, I enjoy the 40% blitz rate that only the Minnesota Vikings were willing to give anyone last season, but there are my reservations for just how high risk this defense can be at times. But it's not to say I don't love what they've done this offseason or just what this defense has turned into over the last year or two. The Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel thing that they have going on over there off the edges is one of those foot in my mouth type of situations, because I understood the move of getting rid of Danielle Hunter to bring in Jonathan Grenard. You're getting younger, more cost-effective, and my only concern was, is Grenard going to be able to live up to what Danielle Hunter was for this defense? Ultimately, he did. Andrew Van Ginkel, I completely wrote off. I'll be completely honest about it. If you weren't around last year, completely wrote him off. Did not think it was a massive signing for them whatsoever. Foot in my mouth. Between Grenard and Van Ginkel, you're looking at 33.5 sacks last season and a ton of pressures between the two. So, I mean, I will openly admit, I was wrong there. So love the dynamic duo they have coming off the edges. They went and they brought in Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave on the interior, and that is something worth watching, but I do like both of these guys despite the injury concerns that you or anyone else may have, or like myself may potentially have with them slotting in. Javon Hargrave basically missed all of last season except for I think it was 3 games or something like that. But his 3 years prior to that, he has been very productive on the interior as both a run defender and as a pass rusher. So a great mix of ability there when he's healthy and on the football field. Jonathan Allen missed some time last season, but he did come back towards the tail end of the year. So he was able to at least get some reps in before the season wrapped up. I believe he played in 5 games before the season wrapped for Washington. And I think the bigger reason for him still not being in Washington is more so just he was the older guy of an interior defensive line that was kind of log jammed with the amount of guys that they had at the interior of the defense. So they just kind of the odd man out situation where it was time for Washington to move on to somebody, and they chose the oldest guy in the room sort of deal. So I still think he can be effective, and bringing them in to basically replace what you lost this offseason on the interior, it does not really I like it. It's either 1-to-1 or potentially an upgrade in my eyes. So no real issues there so long as they're healthy and they're able to come back and be as effective as they were prior to the injuries that they were dealing with last season. And then on top of that, if I was to pick a scheme that I think you could take those two guys in their situations and get a bounce back season out of them, it'd probably be Brian Flores' scheme. If I was to pick any of the 32 teams in the NFL, he's one of the top guys on the list that I would throw these guys into a defense for. That being said, I don't really have many gripes about what Minnesota is going to do this or just in general what they have going on, and I don't really have any doubts about them this season. It's more so just can they lower the risk a little bit? I love the over-aggressive nature that they have. It's, again, really fun to watch, very entertaining, and they made me a believer last season in what they were able to do. One of the best run defenses in the NFL, one of the best pass rushes in the NFL, but they did let a lot get by them. So there is stuff worth keeping an eye on. I think the secondary is in a really good place. I love that they were able to keep Byron Murphy Jr. in that secondary playing at the nickel spot. Isaiah Rodgers is going to come in and essentially replace Stephon Gilmore. I think that's a solid way to kind of move on from that piece there. I like the secondary overall. You, of course, still have Harrison Smith leading the way, the ageless Harrison Smith. So I like the position they're in. It's just a matter of if we can get a little bit better against the pass, more consistent there with all of the blitzing and heavy pressure that his Brian Flores' scheme calls for. And then, of course, at the number 1 spot, last but certainly not least, the Green Bay Packers sitting at the top of the board here. I am a very big continuity guy, so if you've watched me for any extended period of time, you would know that like continuity is king for me, especially on the defensive side of the football. And when you look at this team, you look at what they lost this offseason, not really a ton in terms of starting snaps for this defense last year. Yes, you can point to Jair Alexander, of course. Now he is a Baltimore Raven, literally signing today. And then, of course, you can point to like an Eric Stokes as well, 2 guys from the secondary that departed. But when you look a little bit closer, if you're not familiar with what was going on the roster in Green Bay, Jair Alexander didn't play the last 8 games of last season, and Eric Stokes lost his starting job very early in the season, it felt like. So this is one of those things where it's like, yeah, you lost 2 guys from the secondary, but it wasn't your core guys in the secondary anymore. Like, Jair Alexander's a big name, but the last 2 seasons, he only played in 14 games for Green Bay. Like, he's missed a ton of time due to injuries. So, and just other on the field, off the field issues, because it happened on the field leading to a suspension. So on the field issues, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But a lot's gone on between Jair Alexander and the Green Bay Packers these last couple of seasons. So that all being said, not really too worried about it. And what they did do with their secondary, both last season and now going through this offseason as well, I think has paid off dividends for them as they work towards a post-Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes era for that secondary. I mean, Xavier McKinney, 8 interceptions last season. Unbelievable effort by him in his first year with Green Bay. You go and you get Nate Hobbs, who the only real knock to his game in my eyes is just the fact that he doesn't have nearly as many turnovers as a guy that you would like to have, for considering how many snaps he played for the Las Vegas Raiders and how many starts he had for the Raiders there. But I mean, secondary overall is a solid group of guys that is not like a ton of household names, but they are greater than the sum of their parts. Like, if you're outside Green Bay, you're probably not raving about Keyshawn Nixon, who, yeah, he's an all-pro as a return guy, but you're not raving about him as a corner or somebody like a Javon Bullard. If you're in Green Bay, I'm sure you love those guys, but I'm just talking like household names beyond the Green Bay faithful and more like casual fan base. Maybe you're someone who follows the league like myself, you're probably aware of them, but generally speaking, for the casual audience, probably not super familiar with some of the names that they have in that secondary. But again, greater than the sum of their parts. They're a really good unit. They finished, unbelievably enough, 13th against the pass last season, and they were one of the worst pass defenses the year prior. And then, of course, that's flip-flop there. Reading my notes ahead of what I'm actually saying here. They were one of the top run defenses last year, prior to being one of the worst run defenses the year prior to that, but they were 13th against the pass overall last season as a solid unit, one that I think could potentially take another step forward as Jeff Hafley continues to mold this defense. But I don't have a ton that I'm really too worried about. Like, if I was to get a little nitpicky and really dive into the weeds of anything that like I'm really curious about, the defensive line, really good unit, ton of first-round selections all across the board, literally from left to right side of that D-line. But Lucas Van Ness, he has not been super productive in his career to this point, only 7 sacks through his first 2 seasons, but also hasn't really had the opportunity to be the guy. So depending on who you listen to, it's a matter of whether he was ultimately able to take that opportunity or just not being given the opportunity. I don't live in Green Bay. I don't follow Green Bay like that, so I don't necessarily know why it's taken this long, but he has the opportunity now, and this is his opportunity to prove it. I do subscribe to the idea that it takes like 2 or 3 years for edge rushers to really round into who they're going to be in the NFL. So this is that third season. This is that prove it year that he's going to have. So if he can step up, make some big plays, accumulate more than 4 sacks in a single season as a starter, that's probably like my one big nitpick here. But Green Bay took a big leap forward last season after what was a really tough year the season prior with the way their defense was set up. Again, that run defense was not good. They struggled against the run in 2023, and they made a massive bounce back, jumping into the top 10. That does not happen very often as far as run defenses are concerned. And as long as you're about average or maybe slightly above where Green Bay was last year as far as pass defense goes, this should be a formidable unit from start to finish. Got to see a little bit more pressure, a few more sacks here and there ultimately. But as far as like overall well-rounded out defense, Green Bay takes the cake in my eyes. So let me hear what you all think in the comment section down below. Do you agree, disagree? Let me hear your rankings and whatnot. Fire away. I love discussing with you all. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.